Thank you for staying till the bitter end. Thank you. We've had a wonderful day today. We've heard all about making dementia-friendly communities, dementia friends, and making sure that we break down some of the stigma and discrimination that can occur when you get the diagnosis. Not just for the person that's living with the diagnosis, but sometimes from the family as well. We've also heard about what the research field is, how we can prevent some forms of dementia, and what's happening within all of our different organisations. I'm going to talk to you now about the role of the Admiral Nurse. Now, I can't see how many hands are raised, but if I come from here, I probably can. How many of you actually already heard of Admiral Nurses? Yes, good. A lot of people. Now, Admiral Nurses, for those of you that don't, we're dementia specialist nurses. And we work with families and the person that's living with the diagnosis throughout the pathway of dementia. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what we do. Now, we've heard about the current context, about the growth in the number of people that are living longer, and therefore a consequent growth of people living longer with a condition such as dementia. But dementia, as Alistair said this morning, doesn't travel alone. Often you have other diagnoses with that as well. So you've got what we call comorbidity or multiple morbidity. And because of that, we sometimes find that people's physical health and their psychological health are actually intertwined. And that isn't just about the person that's living with the diagnosis, that's also for the family members or carers. And that is something that we do need to do a lot more work with. And we've heard today about some of the discriminations that can occur, particularly when we're looking for physical health care for people living with a diagnosis of dementia. I have to say, on top of that, I would say the same for some of the carers as well. Sometimes it's about people lacking the recognition that the carer has issues, or the carer having time to go and seek treatment for some of the issues that they're noticing. And there are a growing number of family members providing care. And when people are talking about family members, you could be talking about a family of 14 people that have got all different needs and different perspectives on what is best for the person that's living with the diagnosis. Or you might be talking about the person has no family, but actually has got a lodger or has a neighbour that actually takes their interest. Dementia UK doesn't exclude from that. We look after the person and whoever they feel that their family is. So that might be even the rest of the residents or the care workers that are working in a care setting, for instance. Now, where do we come from? Why are we called Admiral Nurses? And the reason we're called Admiral Nurses was because of Joseph Levy. Joseph Levy's family decided that there really ought to be some specialist nurses working with families because they felt that the needs of the families was often ignored in comparison to the needs of Joseph when he was diagnosed with vascular dementia. And they came up with an idea that we ought to have some specialist nurse that will work with the carer or the family member. And they didn't know quite what to call them, but because Joseph had a love of sailing, his nickname was Admiral Joe. So that's why we're called Admiral Nurses, because Admiral Joe's grandchildren said, why don't we call them after Grandpa and call them Admiral Nurses? So no, I don't have a forces background. No, I don't sail the wide seas, because that's often a question I get asked. And that Admiral insurance advert can be a bane of my life, I have to say. So what do? We provide family and relationship-centred approach. We think it's really important that we fulfil the needs of whatever that person is. So it might be that you're a spouse, you're a partner, you're a child, you're anybody that's surrounding that person, that's providing that sort of input to the person. We also work very closely in partnership with different organisations. No one organisation has got the answer to dementia. And I think we've heard that today, haven't we, with all of the different speakers. We all have a part to play. What we shouldn't be doing is replicating what each other does or overlapping. Resources are too tight for that. We should be working in a different way. And as Angela said, yes, we do end-of-life care, but we actually work across the range for people that are facing complexity. That's our specialism. We believe in dementia-friendly communities, we believe in dementia friends and breaking down the stigma, but actually there are some usually complex issues that can occur in the parts of your journey that we can address as specialist nurses. And we provide supportive education across the range to whoever, really. Sometimes we have people phoning up our helpline who are other health professionals, other social care professionals, members of the public. We have all manner of people that seek our support and advice. We work in a range of settings. So we work in the community predominantly. The majority of our nurses work in the community. We have 200 Admiral Nurses now, which was our aim for the end of this financial year. We've achieved it. We're aiming to get considerably more Admiral Nurses. Majority will work in the community because that's where the majority of people living with dementia are. That's where the families are. But we also have nurses working in the care home settings, working on Direct, which is our national helpline, working in acute hospitals, working in home care, like domiciliary settings, in local authority, and also in hospice settings. Because people facing complexity are in all of those different settings, so it makes sense for us to work in those areas. So if we look at where do we fit in, if you look at the triangle in front of you, at the base of the triangle, that's basically saying that everybody that gets a diagnosis of dementia should have information and advice and services. So that's the advice layer. So everybody on receiving that diagnosis should get some what we call post-diagnostic support or post-diagnostic advice. Some people will need that little bit more of support. So for instance, they might want to go to dementia cafes, they might need some singing for the brain, they might need some services that are more than just giving some information and support, as important as that is. So usually that's delivered by dementia support workers, advisors, wellbeing coordinators. Predominantly, the first two tiers tend to be delivered by voluntary organisations and in combination, obviously, with health and social care staff. Tier 3 is where we fit in. We deal with this. The reason we're at the top of the triangle isn't because we're the best. Basically, it's because you need a lot less Admiral Nurses because not everybody is going to face complexity all of the time through the journey. So we're there for when that does happen for some families. And where do we cover? Well, we've said, yes, we do end of life. That is one of our specialisms, but we do look at complexity across that pathway. So, for instance, in the pre-diagnosis phase, the complexity there might be somebody that doesn't want to go to get a diagnosis, and the family are having a real hard difficulty coping and getting services and support because there isn't a diagnosis. Or it could be a family member has noticed they're getting the same symptoms that their mother had and that their mother's mother had, i.e. it's got a genetic background. So they're worried about what's happening to them. So that's where we come in for the pre-diagnosis. Once a person's diagnosed, sometimes people don't take that very well. They want additional support. And again, we will give that additional support, particularly if you know that the diagnosis you've just been given could have a genetic component. People often want that support at that time. Or it could be they want to know what the diagnosis means for their job. Should they disclose it to their employers? And often that's the sort of calls we get on our helpline. And then the living with dementia, we want families to live as well as is possible. Dementia, as we all know, is a progressive disorder, and at times we are going to need a little bit of help. I've been a professional working in this sort of field for 36 years now, and I've also been a family member of somebody that had dementia. And I have to say, I think there was a question in the previous group, and it was, so can a carer make a good healthcare worker or a care worker with families living with dementia afterwards? Despite all of my experience and my supposed expertise in the area, I found the experience of being a family member incredibly difficult. It was totally different having the 24-hour responsibility. So yeah, I know that you don't necessarily, you're not necessarily able to do that long-term caring role in a different setting. End-of-life care, it is a diagnosis that when it's given, we do know that there's going to be a progression and we do know there's going to be end of life. But let's be honest, when we're born, we know there's going to be an end of life too. So we try and support people around kind of having those conversations, because in our society, we're not terribly good about talking end of life, are we? It's kind of, oh, keep that quiet. So no, that's something that we have an expertise in. And we also continue after the person has passed away with the family members. And those of us that were in the group previously with Louise was saying that after her mother died, she felt she needed the support because her role had changed so markedly. She was a little bit all at sea. And that's what we do as Admiral Nurses as well. We help people to find themselves again, to discover how they can move forward. Value for money. The age-old thing that we always get asked when we go along to hosts, and they say, okay, yes, Admiral Nurses, sound a brilliant idea. How much do they cost? Second, how much do they save? Oh yes, and by the way, quality. What's the quality like? Now, we can say hand on heart that in those areas where the research backs up the effectiveness of Admiral Nursing. Now, Admiral Nurses don't work in isolation. We work with other people as well, like the Alzheimer's Society, Age UK in one of those cases, local authority in the other. But the Admiral Nurses' contribution were the figures that you can see there. Independent, we do a lot of evaluations on the Admiral Nurse services that we've got to actually say there is effectiveness, but more importantly, the quality of life of families is improved. And we have a lot of evidence on that. Just go onto our website and you can find the information you need. So, okay, I'm talking about Admiral Nurses. What's Dementia UK then? Where does Dementia UK fit in? Dementia UK is the charity. Admiral Nurses is what we deliver. That's our brand, in effect. So what we do is we support the Admiral Nurse. So we have one day a month where they come into us and we make sure all Admiral Nurses, whether in the Isle of Wight or up in Glasgow, are practicing at the same level, i.e. they're Admiral Nurses. We've got an evaluation team, we've got research, and we also increase the numbers of Admiral Nurses that we've got. In the last 3 years, we've over doubled the numbers of Admiral Nurses we've got in the UK, and we continue to try and do more. So finally, what do? We build resilience in families. That's our bread and butter. We help families to stay together. We help families to make the decisions. And the families, as I was saying before, that includes the person that's living with the diagnosis. We involve families all the way through, right the way from how do we work as a charity, our strategic aims, everything that we do is underpinned by families. That's the be-all and end-all as far as we're concerned as a charity. Thank you very much for listening, and any questions I'm sure we will answer.